Hello and welcome to episode 83 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by a familiar face, a man we haven't seen in a little while here, but MMO Executive Editor Mike Mayer. Mike, good to see you, man. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Hope everything's going well.
Yeah, I think it would be a very different conversation had Omar Narvaez not hit that walk-off hit for the Mets. Definitely a very different tone in Mets land than there could have been.
Yeah, and I believe that was Narvaez's first hit at home this year, if I'm correct. So, good time to have that happen. Obviously, like you said, the Mets walked it off today, beating the Giants. Welcoming the Dodgers in tomorrow. But Mets are 3-7 in their last 10 games here. Losers of a few in a row there, finally able to break it. But I think we kind of have to start as far as with the Mets struggles right now. It's Edwin Diaz. Obviously, I believe it's three straight saves that he's blown, going back to yesterday's game. Obviously, they took him out of the closer's role temporarily, but then he, was in the game yesterday to try and hold it down. It didn't work out. Obviously, we know he was in tears at his locker after talking about one of his blown saves, just how he's not up to par. We know he had a knee injury last year and was, out all of last year. So, there's got to be maybe some sort of, grace period for him. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts here on Diaz's struggles. And if this is something you think the Mets should be worried about kind of long term.
Yeah, and I think obviously this is a big surprise. I think for anyone connected with the Mets, Diaz looked healthy when he pitched in spring training. He's looked healthy when he's pitched in games, but not just a surprise, but kind of something they didn't expect to happen. And they've had some wins recently or games recently that look like wins. And when you have Edwin Diaz in, you just assume it's going to be wins. So that's bigger than like a regular loss, right? To cough up some leads and have Diaz do it when you just assume he's going to lock it down. And I know, like you said, he was crying at his locker, and there's been some comments about him lacking confidence and stuff. And I think, that's certainly part of the conversation, but to me, it always comes back to stuff. And anyone's going to lack some confidence when their fastball is 3 to 4 miles per hour slower than it was before, when their slider isn't getting the same break that it did before, when they don't have the same command of the slider that they had previously. You're not going to have the same confidence. That's just the reality of it. And you're going to get hit harder too, right? Like it's very hard to succeed when you just do not have your best stuff.
Sure.
Diaz at 96, 97 is still a pretty good pitcher, but he's not that lockdown guy that we had seen in the last couple of years before the injury. So I think that's really the biggest question is going forward is, does Diaz get that 2 to 3, 4 miles per hour back? Does he get that command back? Is this just purely rust from not pitching it for a full year? Is this Edwin Diaz post knee surgery? I think that's the bigger concern for me than any confidence issues. I think Diaz has been through a lot as a Met, right? He's seen the really downs and he's seen the high. So I think,
sure.
I don't want to downplay it because obviously I never want to downplay any player's mental health, but I think Diaz is the type of guy, given what he's gone through in New York, that he can bounce back confidence wise. I think he can do that. And that'll be obviously good for him, but I'm still far more worried about long-term is his stuff. He's obviously just not going to be the same guy and not be able to be that lockdown end of the game guy if he's throwing 96, 97. We've seen that now. We've seen that. And that makes sense too, right? Like 2 to 3 miles per hour is a huge difference in Major League Baseball. That's a significant difference. So I think from the Mets standpoint, they have to hope that you get Diaz out there, maybe get him in some lower leverage stuff, maybe get that confidence going a little bit, but also obviously hope that once he gets into more games and maybe just gets his arm into that midseason shape, that he's going to have that fastball. I think that's what you really have to hope for.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think we're agreed on his struggles being a concern, but I'm a little, I disagree a little bit as far as where I worry about with the stuff. I don't worry about him sitting 96, 97. I think we've seen him now at this point too at times. With two strikes, he's gotten the 98, the 99. We've seen that. I'm just worried with the location. He just doesn't seem confident at all, being able to locate that pitch anytime he wants, like he was able to 2 years ago. And with that, it seems like obviously I agree with the slider not having the depth that he's used to, but because it looks like he doesn't have that confidence in the fastball, he's got to compensate with the slider, and obviously he's getting killed by that. So hopefully, I'm a little less concerned about the miles per hour because I think if he was able to locate that better, his fastball I think would be a little less a concern. You would be able to overcome that, and I think his velocity, like you mentioned, as far as once he gets into midseason, how that'll come up. I think it's gonna, no pun intended, it's gonna take him a little while to get his legs under him. After missing a year, I don't know if the pitch clock plays anything into it. Just that he was something he didn't do. Obviously last year being out with the injury, it's something he didn't have to adjust to. It's he's getting back from the injury and getting used to these new rules. Whatever, I don't know. But obviously it's concerning. It's just want to see him have confidence in that stuff again. Like I said, he was able to throw his fastball, his slider, any count, any time when he needed to. It seemed like a couple of years ago, and hopefully he can kind of get back to that. That's kind of where my main concern is. But outside of him, I guess there's obviously a lot of other concerns. I know there's Lindor that we can talk about, which I feel like we've talked about enough to start the season. I don't want to get to him. But as far as pitching goes, I want to talk about some positive. Luis Severino, he really seems like someone that's, obviously being healthy. We got to see how that happens, that plays out the rest of the season, but seems to has really kind of turned things around for him. His last five starts, he's looked really solid. Obviously, his last one being the other day against the Giants, going 7 innings, 2 hits, 1 run. Walks struck out or walk three, struck out six, but it seems as though he's the most reliable starter that the Mets have by a long shot at this point. At someone that can give them any sort of innings and quality. So I just want to get your thoughts on Severino here. His 2024 so far, and if he looks to be someone that the Mets should kind of hopefully maybe look to keep on long term past 24.
I mean, just think about what you said, that you could argue he's been the Mets' best starter this year, and go back to like February and imagine like saying
Sure.
that. Um, the Mets certainly signed him with hopes that he was going to be healthy, and we knew the upside was there. Look, he's had some really good years with the Yankees, and he's not that same pitcher anymore. He's not that same strikeout guy, but like you said, he's just been mostly consistent with going out there and doing 6 innings of 2, 3 run ball. And I mean, that's all you can ask for really from a starter, a guy that they thought that was going to be like their third or fourth starter. Um, I think he's been really good. And like you said, I think at this point, you got to kind of start talking. I mean, I would, if I was Stearns, now that he's shown what he's shown, about keeping him longer term. Look, because the Mets don't have any pitching tied up outside of
No.
Senga, and obviously that's a massive question mark right now. Um, they don't have any pitching tied up for next year. So if you, I'm sure the Mets like what they've seen from Severino, so that it wouldn't be a bad idea to get on that as soon as possible. But yeah, I mean, he's obviously one of the lone bright spots in what has been not just a bad season, but a bad stretch for the Mets. So for him to go out there and have that good outing against the Giants, certainly a good thing for the Mets to see. And yeah, I mean, you talk about guys who have exceeded expectations, and of course, like Reed Garrett is probably the first guy that comes to
Sure.
mind for this
Sure.
year. But I think after Garrett, Severino's got to be right there too.
And like, what do you see the difference being, or that folks are talking about? Obviously, you talked about Severino not being the strikeout pitcher, power pitcher that he was when he came up with the Yankees. Is it his sinker that's made a difference now? It's getting a lot more ground ball. He's not used to, but more confident in the fact of pitching the contacts and getting the outs that way. I'm just kind of curious there.
Well, I think, I mean, they touched on a little bit when they signed him, is he kind of caught on to the fact that he was tipping his pitches a little bit.
Sure.
And I mean, and we started this podcast talking about confidence. Just think about the confidence in knowing that you're not doing that anymore,
Sure,
so that
sure.
you're able to pound the strike zone, and kind of let the movement do what it does. And so I don't think he's still on his fastball and his slider. I don't think he's got the same bite that he did previously when he was a dominant pitcher, but it's good enough to, like what you're talking about, where he's inducing a bunch of weak contact with those pitches. And that's certainly enough, right? The Mets, I mean, for the most part, I think are average defensive team. So when he's getting a bunch of weak contact, um, he's getting a lot of easy outs, and that's again why he's going 7 innings like he did the other day, 6 innings. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but in nowadays in baseball, if you got a starter that's consistently going 6 and 7 innings once in a while, I mean, that's really good length that you're getting. So yeah, I think this is, I don't think this is any like sort of flash in the pan or anything with Severino. I think this is, he understands what type of pitcher he is now, and he has the confidence to pitch that way. So I think this is the type of guy that we're going to see for him for the rest of however many years he stays productive.
Yeah, you talk about exceeding expectations, like you said, someone that outside of, I mean, I don't even know if we're going to get to Sanga. We might mention him at the end of the show, but just there's so much up in the air, as far as the rotation outside of this year. And Severino exceeding expectations like he was. Imagine though, if Severino of all people ends up getting an in-season extension here out of some of the players that could potentially be leaving after the season. That would be pretty funny. But definitely, it seems like as though I know he seems to pitch out of traffic a lot. I know that's one thing. Probably walks, seems to walk a few too many guys, but pitches around that. I don't know if that has something to do with him again, just kind of changing the pitcher who he is, understanding that he's pitching to contact and trying to cut and move the ball a bit more. And obviously, you might walk a few more guys as far as with that because you're kind of manipulating the strike zone a bit more. But I would imagine, as he continues to kind of build on this and understanding the pitcher he is now, that the walks would go down a bit as well. And again, for the mid back rotation guy, I think, and that's what obviously you'd want him to be going forward for on a team that would be more competitive. But I think for what you're seeing for now, I think the Mets would sign up for that absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's, he's certainly done what they had hoped when they signed him and more. And like you said, it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea to try to get something done to have him long term, because we mentioned Sanga, which, I mean, we can talk about real quick. I think it's a short conversation really at this point, is we just don't know
Sure.
when he's going to be back. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Mets know. I don't think there's any team doctors that know. I don't think anyone at this point. This has like a feeling of one of those DeGrom years, right, where there was an update every week and it seemed like it was
Sure.
something different every week, right?
Yeah.
Like there was
Yeah.
something different going on. And I mean, that tends to happen when a guy has an arm injury and he's trying to get back through it. And so
Right.
these little things pop up like inflammation, and that's unfortunately what happens sometimes. And I think we're getting to the point where, I mean, you're certainly looking at the, after the trade deadline, that you're hoping he's back, and then hopefully he can just use that to build on going into next year. But I mean, besides him, and obviously Christian Scott is in that conversation now. I mean, I think he's pretty firmly in that conversation.
Sure.
It's only been a couple of starts, but I mean, he's shown that he's a big league pitcher. I think we can agree on that. So I mean, so you have Sanga, hopefully Sanga, and you have Scott, but like I said, other than that, there's just no one there. So Severino certainly making his case to be one of those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how his kind of the rest of his year plays out, second half, all that sort of thing. But we're doing the sandwich here, so we'll go back to a negative. And unfortunately, this is what we'll bring up Brett Baty. Obviously, had a big home run yesterday. We know that. But overall, he started out the season well. First couple of weeks seemed to, be hitting the ball well, but pitchers seem to adjust, and he hasn't seemed to really adjust back. I just want to get your thoughts on Baty's struggles, and it'll probably um, catapult us into the last topic of someone that should be probably playing a little bit more than him at this point. But we'll start with Baty.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, first of all, I haven't been on since, or we haven't done a bunch since Vientos was just called up. So
Sure.
I think the Mets made the right move there, right? I mean, you at least had to Vientos has played a lot of AAA at this point. He has nothing left to show there. And Baty was struggling, so I think it was wise for the Mets to see what they have in Vientos. And I think Mendoza to this point has kind of really done a good job of mixing in the playing time. He got Vientos an early start. Then Vientos is hit, so he got him 2 starts against a righty. And he's still getting Baty some starts because I mean, if Baty's here, you got to get him some at bats. And I think Baty's had a couple of decent games. I mean, he was on base twice today. He had the home run you were talking
Sure.
about. But I think at some point, and David Stearns kind of alluded to this when he was on FAN the other day, is that their bench construction isn't really built for the long term, and how they essentially
Sure.
have no backup shortstop or second baseman right now.
Hmm.
Um, so I think really that points to you carry one of Vientos and Baty. I think that's really what he's alluding to. And I mean, again, we're talking about small sample size with Vientos, but he certainly played very well since he's come up. He's hitting with a ton of power. He's not striking out a whole ton. He's even walking a little bit, which isn't always something that he's shown at the major league level. I mean, he's had a couple of bad plays at third base, but the Mets know that's what you're getting with Vientos.
Sure.
With Vientos, he is more of the offensive player, and that's what I mean. I think that's what they, not that they couldn't use a guy who plays both, but they when they brought him up, they were in a stretch of just not scoring a ton of runs.
Sure.
They've done a little better lately. They've certainly shown some power lately, and Vientos has been a big part of that. But to the point, I think another, I mean, even if it's another week, 2 weeks, I think at some point the Mets kind of have to make a decision what to do with Baty, and maybe Vientos forces that, right? If
Sure.
Vientos in 2 weeks, Vientos is still has an OPS over 900, I think we're at the point where yeah, you send Baty down so that he can get those consistent at
Hmm.
bats at AAA, because you don't certainly want to fully give up on a player like Baty. He's still fairly
Sure.
young, and he's shown that he's the type of player that's going to work hard and try to improve. We've seen that on the defense, because
Sure.
he's certainly transformed his defense over the last calendar year. He's a much
Yep.
better defender now than he was in the big leagues, and he's a pretty solid defender at third right now, and that's certainly an asset to have. So you want to see if you can work on some of the offensive things with him. And I think it sounds like such a simple thing, but it's just not hitting the ball on the ground as much as he does. I mean, again, that's an oversimplification. Like, we could dig into like the swing decisions and swing mechanics and stuff like that, but you're simply just not going to hit for enough power if you're hitting the ball on the ground over 50% of the time.
Sure.
It's just not a recipe for success unless you're like Lance Johnson and Juan Pierre and Luis Castillo and like those type of guys. Like, and that's not what Baty is. So
Right.
you you obviously want to see him making more impact on the ball, hitting it in the air. And again, that's an oversimplification for a podcast. There's been folks that have kind of dug into it deeper, and we certainly can at another time talking about how that might be an issue in general in the Mets hitting philosophy starting in the minor leagues. Um, but yeah, I think, like I said, I think the overall point is if Vientos is still hitting this way in 2 weeks, I think the move is to send Baty to AAA and let him get the at bats that he needs.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. If Vientos keeps doing what he's doing here, he's really gonna, no matter what, force their hands. And at that point, you want to get Beatty consistent at bats because the offense is going to have to take over if Vientos keeps doing what he's doing. I agree. It's a hard thing for Beatty. Like you said, he's still a young player. You don't want to give up on someone like that. But at this point, if Vientos is forcing their hand and he's having good at bats, like you're talking about, and he continues to swing the bat well, you can't really keep him down in AAA at this point. You got to, let him come up here and like you said, obviously he's an offensive first player. You'll take what you get with the defense, but it's something that they probably would have to do as far as Vientos get consistent at bats, so they can get a little bit more pump in this offense. But
And
I
I will say one thing on Vientos' side on the defense
sure,
is even when he came into camp this year, he looked like, I don't want to say better shape, but he looked like he was moving a little bit better, like he was a little more athletic,
Sure.
a little better athletic build this year. He was moving side to side a little bit better, and I mean that's obviously something that's going to help him at third base. So I do think you've seen a little bit of an improvement at third base defensively from. I still don't think that's going to be his calling card, but it is something.
Sure.
It's something nice to see, kind of like what we saw with Baty. We saw an improvement there, and I do think we'll see a little bit of an improvement from Vientos there.
Yeah, no, and if he keeps hitting the way he does too, you'll take any defensive improvement. So that's a boost there, which is good. Just be interesting to see. It's unfortunate. Obviously, we know things can change. You have a whole nother you still have another month and then a whole nother half of a season to go. But it's obviously kind of a year that I think I don't know if fans thought it was gonna the offense would struggle this much really. Guys like Lindor and stuff like that, but obviously frustrating first kind of couple months of the season, but hopefully they can kind of turn things around. And with the extended wild card, we know if a team goes on a run, they can get right back in the thick of it. I think they're only still a few games out if you're looking at it that early. But they're going to have to hit some more and get some more pitching outside of some more guys like we talked about. But I think that's going to wrap up everything for this week. We'll catch you next week after the Dodgers series, or at the end of next week after the Dodgers series coming into town tomorrow. But until then, as always, everyone, let's go Mets.